Hi, and welcome to another episode of Scooter the Troubleshooter's Tech Tips. On today's segment, we're going to be talking about how to set up Azure AD to provision Servicenow user accounts and groups. Now, this is a request that I've had come up a couple of times, and I'm going to go ahead and show you how to set it up. I'm going to show you the features that are enabled by default. I'm going to show you some of the things that you should change, and I'm also going to give you some cautions as to why you may want to go a different route for this. So without further ado, we're going to jump in. As you can see on my screen here, I've got my Microsoft 365 Admin Center open where I'm in my development account. If you don't have a developer account, I would suggest listening to my other video on how to go about that process to create one. Gives you a great playground to do things like this, to where you can integrate back and forth between development environments and check things out, see if things work, finalize the settings and all of that before testing it out on something that's either production or company facing, or basically lets you get the bugs out. So with that said, we've got our user accounts created. So I did the 16 user accounts that were fake, that were already created as part of the development user pack. I've got my own account here. And then I have my development Servicenow instance set up, and I've got it open here. So one of the first things that we're going to want to do is go, and instead of being on the admin portal, we actually want to go into the Azure portal. So if we go into Show All and go into Azure Active Directory, there's bits and pieces that we're going to have to do in both environments. But the first part about this is I'm going to show you where this is. So if you go into the Azure Active Directory and then go into Enterprise Applications, we'll add a new application and we'll type in the name Servicenow, and we'll go ahead and kick that on and hit Add. Adds the application. And now you can see here we've got assigning a group, setting up single sign-on, provisioning user accounts, conditional access, and self-service. Now, you don't necessarily have to do all things all in one. So you can set this enterprise application up twice. You can set it up once as this is what I use to provision, and then you can set up another to do the actual single sign-on. So that's what we're going to do in this case, just because I want to separate those two out, sort of show the differences between what we're doing. So in this case, this is going to be for our provisioning. And I'm going to go ahead and hit Save here. And then I'm going to go back up to my overview. Now in provisioning, one of the first things it's going to ask you for as soon as you hit on Get Started is you want to go to automatic provisioning. It's going to ask you for the instance name, an admin username, and an admin password. Now there's some security settings that we need to set up on the Servicenow side, but also in most cases you're not going to use your admin account to actually do this. You're going to set up another account and give it admin privileges. So we're going to walk through that as well. So I'm going to go jump over to my Servicenow instance, and in the areas of things that we need to change, if you type in High, one of the first things we're going to have to change is in the high security settings. This require basic authentication for incoming schema requests needs to be unchecked, and then we need to save it. And then if we go down a little bit further, there's this enforce strict security on incoming SOAP requests, because what Azure is basically doing is SOAP and calling out and adding things to the table. So in order to do this, we need to go through and turn this, or uncheck this box. But in order to do that, if you notice it's grayed out, we need to add the security admin privilege to our account. So we'll go ahead and elevate our privileges. And now we'll go back through and go to the enforce strict security, uncheck that, and click Save. The last setting we're going to have to change is underneath Properties, and it is under System Properties, and it is under Web Services. And it is going to be require basic authentication for SOAP requests. So we're going to go ahead and turn that off, and we're going to hit save. So that's it from a permissions side of what we need to change on the actual platform. Now we need to go through and just create our new user. So I'm going to go through and go into user administration users. And I'm going to create a new user. I'm going to give it the user ID of Azure AD Sync. Azure AD. And give it a super hard, super secret password. And I'm going to go ahead and hit submit. I don't need to remember that password. I do now, however, need to go back into it, so I'm going to go into my Azure AD Sync, because one of the things that I forgot to do, now normally I could have gone over here and hit save and then gotten to the same spot, but I forgot to do that, so I'm going to go into roles, go into edit, and when the roles come up, I'm going to add, not the action designer, but the admin role to it, because the admin role is going to be what's required in order to create user accounts and create groups on the table. So all of that's done now. So now we have our user account set up. It's got the admin role. So now we can jump back over to the Azure AD side. Oh, we need our instance name. Guess that would help. So it's dev 91671. So we're going to go in here, dev 91671, and we're going to go Azure _AD _ sync. And we're going to type in my super secret password, and we're going to type test connection. Now, if you don't do those security changes that I did at the start of the Servicenow side of this configuration, you'll get a message that basically says that your instance name appears to be invalid, or provide the correct admin name and password along with the valid Servicenow instance. First time I hit this, I went through round and round looking at it and going, nope, my instance name's right, nope, my username's right, nope, my password's right. Couldn't figure it out, couldn't figure it out, couldn't figure it out. There is a high article regarding some of those configuration settings. I'll include that in the blog post on this. If there's any questions, please feel free to reach out, and I'll be more than happy to answer them. But there are those few settings that need to be changed and allow those two environments to talk to each other. You can set up a notification email now for if there's a failure with the system. So in this case, with it being a development environment and going to hibernation, if you set the email account up, as soon as your environment goes to hibernation, the next time the provisioning cycle comes around, it's basically going to kick out an error. So I'm not going to go ahead and type that in right now. So we'll hit save here. And now what we're going to do is turn provisioning on. I got to hit save again. Now if I come down into mapping, it's not there, but you have to go out and come back in. So I'm going to go back and go into edit provisioning, go into mappings, and now you can see provision AD users, provision AD groups. And you have the option to either sync only assigned users and groups, so you can set up specific users and groups that you want to sync. So if I was to do that, you would basically add them here and say, okay, this is where I'm going to assign them. In this scenario, I'm actually going to just tell it to provision everyone. So I'm going to go back into edit provisioning, go in and say assign or sync all users and groups, and then I'm going to go back into my mappings because I want to point out some things. So in users, by default, this sets up and says, okay, I'm going to sync the username, whether or not the user is active. I'm going to sync the email address, the user given name, surname, first name, last name, all that stuff. What you'll notice here is it's not syncing location and it's not syncing department. Now you can add those attributes in, but unfortunately it's still not going to synchronize the way that you'd expect it to, because of the way that ServiceNow is working on the background, that location and department are both reference fields to another table, and the Azure AD Sync engine doesn't have the ability to write to those tables. So if you put dynamic creation on those fields, it'll work, sorta. I wouldn't suggest it. It's another one of those, this is one of those holes that I look at and go, is this really the best solution for an enterprise? And would this be satisfactory to somebody for getting the job done? Missing departments and missing the location fields, I think department's fairly important in most ServiceNow implementations. So you can do a lot of things based off of department. You can do a lot of things based off of location. If those are missing, you're missing out on a lot. So that's a key area of concern. The other one, this is something that Microsoft turns on by default, is they're syncing delete objects. So if I delete an object in my Azure AD, it's going to delete that same object over in my ServiceNow instance. Now, if anybody's on that's been in ServiceNow for any length of time whatsoever, you'll know that deleting objects in ServiceNow is bad. It basically leaves remnants behind, because if I'm working at the help desk, I've worked on 100 tickets, oh, Scott gets fired, they remove my account, and I delete the account out of ServiceNow. If I go in and look at those records and look at the things that I had done in the past, now it's going to have is this sys-ID that goes nowhere. It's not going to have my name. It's not going to be associated to my record, so it leaves some dirty laundry behind. That's why it's ServiceNow's recommendation that anytime that you're leaving the organization, that you just disable the account. In order to get through licensing and all that, you can create business rules. You can create flows that remove the roles and your groups from that user so they're not consuming a license. But it's always recommended that you leave that user object there so that there's always that history. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that off and go ahead and hit save. And then I'm going to go back into provisioning, and I'm going to look at the groups. So groups, you can see that we're syncing the display name, we're syncing active or not, we're syncing the description, the mail, and the members. Now you notice here that we're syncing members as users. Now, that's a key difference when you're talking the differences between ServiceNow and Azure. In Azure, you can have a group that has groups inside of it as members as well as users. Now, that's another area where there's going to be problems. And in order to demonstrate this, I actually sort of set the stage for it. So I'm not going to change anything else here. I would change the delete. So again, we don't like deletes in ServiceNow. We like, hey, if we're going to make something inactive or hide it, we can go that route, but always keep it around. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save here. Now to show you what I've done, I'm going to go back out of, I didn't save it, or nothing else is saved here. Oh, I need to save there. That's what's going on. Okay, so now I go back into Azure Active Directory and I go into groups. Now I set up, now these aren't here by default, the all company is, so I created a sales group and I created a licensing sales group, something that's sort of near and dear to my heart. Inside of the sales group, there are 2 users and 1 group that are members of it. So if you look at it, the members are myself, Adele, and another group. So as soon as this sync runs, and users get created on the ServiceNow platform, we're going to go take a look at what that looks like, and you'll see the other reason why I don't necessarily like this as a solution for provisioning. So without further ado, let's go check and see if this is ran yet. So I'll go into my ServiceNow provisioning, go into provision user accounts, and if I go into edit provisioning, I can see that it was 100% complete. Let's go over into the ServiceNow world and tell it to do a reload or refresh on that list and sort by created. And there you go. You can see all of my user accounts have already been synced over. Not too bad, but again, there are some small issues with it. So first issue, again, not syncing over department, not syncing over location, a little bit of a problem. The bigger problem comes in is when you start dealing with groups. So I'm going to go into my groups now, and I'm going to go check out that sales group. So if I sort this by updated, I'll get all the stuff that I just recently created here, and you can see my sales group. Inside of my sales group, now ServiceNow has the ability to have users in groups inside of groups, but they separate the two to where they're very compartmentalized, where Azure allows them to commingle, and as a result, you can see the two users synced over, but now I've got this weird little empty object here that is representative of the group, and unfortunately with it being this weird little object, it actually isn't the group. So you start looking at things like doing roles based off of groups and subgroups and having permissions laid out like that. It's not just as simple as managing all of those groups in Azure AD and everything flows over, because the subgroups don't work. So that said, even though this is a solution that will work for populating users, I'm going to have to say that I wouldn't recommend it just because of the problems that are around. From a user side, not syncing all of the attributes, not a great thing. By default, having delete on and not calling it out to the users, not a great thing. Not having to disable security measures that are on by default in ServiceNow, again, not a great thing. And then the final nail in the coffin for it is I always recommend for my customers to use roles based on groups, and as you're doing groups and subgroups and all of that, because you're not able to sync subgroups over the way that it is in Azure to the way that it is in ServiceNow, causes a lot more administrative headaches, so it's just not really worth it. A far better solution is sort of the tried and true LDAP queries. So as long as you have an environment that Azure AD isn't the only thing in it, so if you have on-premise Active Directory domain controllers, set up a mid server, set up LDAP servers to it, run all of that. Ends up being more secure because you're able to keep your ServiceNow platform secure. The internal talking is going on your network between the domain controller and the mid server. Everybody's happy, and it's been able to do all of these nested groups, location, all of that stuff. This is stuff that ServiceNow has been doing since pre-Aspen at this point for all of these groups. It just is a better solution. If you have any comments, you have any questions, you go, nope, Scott, you're absolutely wrong. You just set it up wrong. This is what you need to do in order to make it work. I welcome all comments. Please feel free to drop me a line. Thank you. Hope the video has been informative.